Today, we're going to talk about mastering Civil 3D workflows, the standardization for a seamless project. So those of you that don't know who I am, my name's Ryan Wunderlich. I have over 38 years of experience in AutoCAD across multiple industry segments. I'm currently the support team manager here at Imagine It for our AEC team. This is our dedicated support group. I have taught AutoCAD as a certified instructor. I have over 15 years in CAD management experience. 8 years in cruise ship building, 5 years supporting civil survey landscape architecture before that. As I usually tell people, I've worked in just about every field except aerospace and automotive. Those are the only two I have not gotten into, but I have touched every other industry at some point, starting with mechanical design, printed circuit board design, schematics, one-line diagrams, acoustic design, architecture design, things like that. And I have a bachelor's in business management and a master's in organizational management. So with that, we're going to get started. Here's today's agenda. So first of all, we're going to develop an understanding of directory structure, file naming, and how to prevent issue saving. We're going to talk about setting up custom template locations, setting up styles in your templates. We're also going to cover reference templates. We're going to talk about custom pathing to part catalog locations and standard profiles for your users. We're also going to talk about the basics of a startup script to ensure certain settings are enforced. We're also going to talk about where to find commonly used elements like title blocks and standard details. We're going to talk about ensuring consistency across teams for better project outcomes and why feedback is important in all of this. So with that, we're going to get started on the first one, develop an understanding of directory structure, file naming, and how to prevent issue saving. This is a big one. So the first place in any standards that you are looking at is we have to have a cohesive and easy to follow directory structure. Things to know, that Windows has a limit of 256 characters before issues start to occur. If your entire file path, including the drawing name and extension, exceed 256 characters, you may get issues where things can't be opened. It'll tell you it can't find the file, even though you're looking right at it, things like that. This includes all the characters, spaces and symbols, file names and extensions. Keeping your path names minimal will help prevent these type of issues from occurring. Now, some Autodesk applications will have issues with XREFs, external references, primarily PDFs and images, that are 1/2 that length, so around 127 characters in length. So once you start exceeding 127 characters in length, you may start to see things where images and or PDF attachments in your drawings no longer load correctly, and we have to move those down the path closer to the root in order for them to be seen. Now, your file naming conventions should make sense and have a defined method, and keeping these names as short as possible is important. When I'm talking about, start with what you know. These are the things you need for your folders, and create a blank dummy folder structure to see what it looks like. Start with your known folders, folders you know you need at each phase of a project. Put a structure into place when a directory doesn't exist, i.e. a folder naming convention. Look at previous projects and see where confusion was either created and try to see how to prevent that in the future. Now, all of this comes down to just directory structure. If you have a cohesive directory structure, everything else gets easier from here. If you have just random directories with no structure, with no file naming conventions, things like that, your people will get confused. And then you want to produce a defined naming standard for your drawings. The typical things I see, or the typical things I like to see, are like a project number, -type, -discipline, drawing type.dwg. An example of this would be 2025-001-EX topo. So we know that this project is a 2025 project. It's the first project, 001, and we know this is an existing topo drawing. These are easy to think about now and start to implement. And when you start having things where names don't make sense, or you get drawings from outside your organization that don't make sense, we have to have something that makes sense within your organization for how we want things named. And again, we want to keep it simple and easy to understand, because if we can do that, we can repeat this later much easier, I should say. So these are the things that I usually start with when I get involved in CAD management and standards. The first thing I want to know is I want to know what your file structure looks like, and I want to know how you name your files. I have gotten into companies and taking a look at standards and things like that where I see directory structures that are a hot mess. And this is a good question. If the file comes from an external source, do you rename it to make it your standard? That is going to depend on me. Normally, I do not, knowing that it's an external file, but I want to make sure all of my files are follow my naming standard. Because if you rename that file, you may not know when you get an update that that file's been changed. So usually I like to leave any external consultants files alone. I'll leave their file name intact so I know what I'm looking for, but I'll make sure that my standards follow my naming convention. Shortcuts seem to be an issue at times when path links and lose links. Yes, absolutely. This comes back all the way back to that 256 character limit. So if your shortcut folder is buried deep and you go look inside that shortcuts folder and you start seeing, you'll see that long hexadecimal name XML file that relates to that. Sometimes data shortcuts will not reload correctly because it simply can't parse that amount of data. So usually in those cases, I may have to move that project shortcut folder closer to the root of that project in order for those data shortcuts to be read correctly. So that comes back to this 256 character limit. So be aware of that limit. A lot of people don't know it, and when you run face first into it, it hurts. So now that you've got a folder structure in place for your projects, now we want to talk about setting up custom template locations, setting up styles in your templates, and we'll also talk about reference templates. So custom template location and style. So once you have a directory structure in place, we now need to look at how we start each drawing for a project. You will want to have at least one custom template that everyone uses as the starting point for all of your drawings. Now, if you are a multidiscipline firm, i.e. you have a survey and a landscape architecture and a civil, and you have all three of those disciplines, you may need 3 different starting templates to accommodate that. Anywhere where you can trim the number of templates causes less confusion later on down the road. You'll want to have a custom template, again, everyone uses as the starting point. Your template should have the following things set up. Your preferred layers. This includes color, line type, line weight, plot style, etc. It should be set up for your preferred plotting style. So if you are either CTB color-based or STB style-based, you'll want to make sure that that starting template has all of those things already in place. Again, the less things you rely on the users to change, the more efficiency you're going to gain because people aren't going to be trying to figure things out. This should also include all of the standard text styles, dimension styles, multi-leader styles that you typically use. You'll also want to have all of the Civil 3D styles you typically use in a project. And when we're talking about Civil 3D styles, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but what you want to really focus on is more along the lines of the 80-20 rule. You want to have 80% of any Civil 3D style you would normally use in there, and 20% of your styles that might be a one-off or might be an occasional. You don't necessarily need to put them in your template, but you'll want to have a structure in place so people understand how to create them or make them or have them come to you to help make them. So you should also have a plan to create a new template every few releases of Civil 3D and not save the current template up. What I mean by that is that every time the DWG format changes, you always want to go through and create a new template. I run across a number of people that have had Civil 3D templates dating back from 2011 and 2012 that they've just simply carried up. The problem with that is those templates tend to contain a lot of garbage information, things that are no longer used by the DWG format, things that are no longer used by Civil 3D, and now we have extra stuff in that drawing that can cause problems later on down the road. So why create a new template every few releases, not open the current template in the new version and save it out as a new file? That's what I just covered. I can actually go into these drawings that have this old Civil 3D 2011, 2012. I can find pointers in there back to old subassemblies that were VBA based, not not .NET based as they are currently. I can find a lot of other pieces and parts in those drawings that are clearly from older versions of CAD, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. You're going to have more frequent crashing. You're going to have a lot of issues where you start a command and there may be a 1 or 2 second delay before it does something. Like even drawing a simple line, it may delay 1 to 2 seconds before it tells you to pick the start point. You click that and then it may delay 1 or 2 seconds before it says pick the next point, etc. When creating a new template for a new release, is it okay to import the styles from the old template? Yes, absolutely is how I typically do it. If a style cannot be imported into a new template from an old one, it will tell you that that style did not import. It'll give you an opportunity to investigate that style and either rebuild it or figure out what's wrong with it. So those are the things that we need to be careful of with custom templates. So once we have that custom template and we set that location, now we're going to get more into setting up styles and the layers and things to pay attention to. Do you need all of the styles and layers up front? Are all of them used all of the time? I have gotten into templates that have 3,000 plus layers and they're only using really 40 or 50 of them. Do you really need all of them? And typically you want to have a standard set of layers that are common across all drawings and styles, then add additional layers that make sense. Like I said, this is that 80-20 rule. You want 80% of all the layers you need and leave 20% to be created as needed, and then have defined standards on layer naming when a layer doesn't exist in your standards. And again, this comes back to a layer should make sense. Those of you that are following national CAD standards, it's really easy. Those of you that are not, have a defined process. So C is always a civil, V is always survey, A is always architecture, something like that. And then think of the same thing for styles. You want to include all the necessary styles to get the drawings done and keep the styles to as few choices as possible. Again, more choices for styles mean more opportunities for people to pick the wrong style when the drawings that you're trying to get out the door. It also means fewer items to maintain as standards get changed and updated. So again, we don't need to have 3,000 note styles as part of a template. We may use them all at some point, but you really want to focus on the ones that are the most often used or the most important. Same thing with surfaces. Do you really need all of the surface styles when you're doing it where you have maybe a 1/10 and a half foot intervals? You know, the typical ones are 1 and 5, 5 and 10, or what is it, 5 and 25, 2 and 10. If you don't use 5 and 25, don't include it in your template, but make sure people know how to get that if they need it. So again, this comes back to your custom template and making sure that that's fully updated and you have all of the correct information in it in order to get the job done. And again, 80-20 is what I usually aim for. So once you have your template you are ready to start with, now where to put it and ensure all your users start there. So the default location for the template directory is in the local user profile. You generally should change that to a network folder or to a local C drive folder that lives outside of Civil 3D. Now there's ways we can do this where we can tell people we need them to modify this path. We're going to talk more about how we commonize those things. If your CAD standards are pushed down to the local machines, which I highly recommend, then all you need to do is create a login script or a batch file or something that will immediately copy anything that's changed on for your standards location onto the local machine and keeps people working as efficiently as possible without them wondering, where do I go for this? Where do I go for that? And again, we want to minimize the number of choices for users. The less choices we give them, the more likely they are to pick the right things. If we give them an entire plethora of things to choose from, somebody will invariably pick the wrong one. And then we have to go back and fix that later. What we're trying to do is eliminate those things as part of our efficiency gain. Now, this is where we get into our custom templates and we go a little further than that. So if you have clients or jurisdictions that require different standards from your own, you can create a custom template for that specific client or jurisdiction or use their supplied one if they have it, or you can use a reference template. And you can attach one or more reference templates to an Autodesk Civil 3D drawing so it will be updated on an ongoing basis with changes to the reference components in the templates. When you attach a reference template to a drawing, the reference components, style settings, property sets, layers, blocks, textiles, line types that are in that reference drawing are copied into your drawing, and the connection between the drawing and the reference template is maintained. I have personally gone through this a few times. There's a couple of counties that have a very specific set of standards on how they want things, and we've always set up a reference template. So we're always starting with our template, and we use the reference template for those. It causes fewer confusion or less confusion down the road. And then reference styles will show as a reference in the settings tab. If you edit a reference style, you can make a local copy or make changes for the drawing session only. In other words, if somebody needs to make changes to it, they can make a local copy of it. If you detach a reference and have used a reference style in it, it will automatically be added to your drawing and now can be edited normally. If you reattach the reference again, it will overwrite your changes if it's selected to sync. And again, add only what you need. You don't generally need to add everything unless otherwise directed. In other words, the reference template doesn't have to have absolutely everything in it. It really needs to be focused on the things that are different. Primarily, this revolves around things like your parts list and your pipe networks and your pressure parts and things like that, because those are the things that are typically changed with jurisdictions. And your Civil 3D drawing, if it can't find the reference template, the styles are still going to be available in the drawing, and it will resync once it becomes available. So this is one of those powerful tools that people don't necessarily use all the time, but understand that reference templates can be a good method of not having to continually create new templates. It just becomes one template you have to modify as the jurisdiction or as the customer standards change. And you can apply it to your common template and it will update those things appropriately. All right, so now we're going to talk about custom pathing to part catalog locations and your standard profiles for your users. So custom pathing and custom profiles. So custom profiles are another way to ensure that specific pathing and standards are used throughout your users and projects. In the custom profile, i.e. an ARG file, you can set system variables, you control the way Civil 3D initially runs. You can put in all your custom preferred settings, all of your system variables, anything like that. You can also set up your custom pathing. So you have support paths for anything that you use, your trusted locations. If you have third-party applications like Lisp or other things, you can set your plotting to be exactly the way you want it, i.e. you can set up your plotting to always default to a specific area for your CTB STBs. You can set up your template locations. You can also set your gravity and pressure parts catalogs, and you can also set up your survey template. So if you are a survey-based group and you have specific survey catalogs that you've created for your line work and for your line work code sets and all of that, you can set all of that up in your custom profile. Would you be able to demo the reference template? Well, I wasn't prepared for that. Brian, let's wait for Q&A and I'll show you the reference template. So once we have our ARG file in place, now we can start talking about a startup script to ensure certain settings are enforced. Now, this is one of the things I like to do. So provided I have a support path that points to where the Lisp is located and I have it in the trusted path, now I can create 2 additional files, and these are just standard text files. So the first one is an acad.lisp. This will typically run once at the startup of Civil 3D. It can be changed to run at each opening of a drawing, but I usually like it to only run at startup. And it's useful for system-specific changes, system variables, updating paths, changing support file paths, etc. The acad.doc.lsp runs every time a drawing is opened, and it's useful for things when you have drawing variables or drawing specific tasks that need to be included. And again, you must have the path where these live in both support paths and trusted paths in order for these to run correctly. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what I put in mine, but I have an ACAD.Lisp that I set up a specific way and an ACAD doc that I have set up a specific way. So every time I launch the ACAD, it's loading certain things. It's changing certain variables. For me, it's changing my OSNAP variable. I like my OSNAP to be turned on, and my preferred settings, I have it to do certain things. And then the ACAD doc does something different, where I'm now focused on drawing specific things. So in my ACAD doc, I can set my layer back to 0. I can change all the current environment variables. I can do a number of things where I can modify that information or change certain things in the drawing without knowing who's been in the drawing before me to where I will like to start the drawing when I get in. And again, these are easy things to do, and we can set this up. And again, this comes back to that ARG and our custom settings, where we have a custom icon that launches our custom settings that are set up to point to our custom pipe catalogs, our custom survey catalogs, our custom plot styles, all of those things. Now, the next piece of this is once we have all of those pieces in place, now we need to start talking about where we find commonly used elements. And primarily, these are the things like title blocks and standard details. This can be a much older or a much bigger piece of it, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that our users, when they're looking for common elements that are not included in your template, title blocks might be one of those. Details, like all of us have I have probably a huge, vast library of details that we bring into drawings when we're doing certain things. We should have a common folder that has your commonly used items, i.e. blocks. You should have it set up and easy to understand, and then you should have a methodology for how you bring it in. You can use Design Center, you can use tool palettes, or you can use the block library function in the block palette for all of those things. The biggest piece of this is this prevents reuse of older and possibly incorrect blocks, and it also prevents copying of bad data out of an old drawing into a new drawing. As your standards change or your details change, we want to make sure everything that we're doing is current and somebody's not opening up an old project drawing and copying and pasting from that into yours because you don't know the validity of if that detail is changed. If there's a problem in the drawing they're copying from, that problem is going to get copied into the new drawing. If that drawing was from an older version of Civil 3D, it can cause untoward issues and can create other elements and other issues inside the drawing you're in. So we want to try and prevent all of those things from occurring by creating this blocks library, and again, we want it to be very set up and make sense. Right? So if you've got a block directory, we set up blocks. We might set up a folder for title blocks and then have them named so that it's very easy to understand what's in there. We might have one for common details, and then we might even break the details down further where it might be, we might have, retaining wall details. We might have, any kind of details like that. If you put people in there, you might need to put a people's one. Right? So think about all of those things and all of your blocks, and we want to make sure that we get rid of any of the duplicates and we put everything in a place that makes sense. Recommend custom tool palettes. Tom, I have a webinar, and I will find that link for you, and I'll put it in the chat here when we get to Q&A. I did a webinar all about tool palettes. Tool palettes are both good and bad for this. And my webinar really goes into the details for that. With the new block palette now, as long as everything's a block and not contained, well, even if it's contained in a drawing, I really do like to use that, depending on the number of people I have. If I'm creating custom tool palettes, that creates kind of a maintenance nightmare in the fact that there's a couple of processes you actually have to go through. And the tool palettes seem to make users lazy, but my users want them. Yeah, I know. And please say, yep, and I will put that. Yeah, all about tool palettes. Great, Lori. I think you sent that to everyone. I hope everyone sees that link. Yep, There it is. So now that we've got our framework in place, i.e. we've got Civil 3D set up the way we want, we have palettes, or not palettes, we have a profile that's pointing to things, and we are all starting with the same common start. Now we can start looking at ensuring consistency across teams for better project outcomes. So this is where we start talking about how to start a new drawing, where to find the correct templates and which template to start with, what to include in certain drawings, like title blocks and details. Not every drawing may have a title block. Not every drawing may have a detail. A lot of your existing topo files or your engineering files, as I call them, all you're doing is you're just creating line work. Right? You're creating line work surfaces, things like that. You may not print that off at all, but you may be using that as data shortcuts or data references in your drawing for everything else. So you may not need title blocks, but what files do you need title blocks in? What files do you need details in? And then you want to start talking about breaking complex drawings into complex projects into multiple drawings that make sense. If you are doing, this is a good example, if you're doing a 6-mile stretch of roadway and you're doing a road rehab and it's 6 miles long, what's going to be the best way to break that down? Now, typically what I would do is I would do all my modeling in a single file, if it makes sense. If my surface is too large, I might have to break that into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 surfaces. Each surface may be a mile long with some overlap, and I may have to do all of my work in multiple files. So you got to start thinking about those things. Where can you break a complex project, or where can you break a surface down into multiple pieces if you start getting those MMS files or the other files that get created when your surface exceeds the point count. So if you're dealing with a DTM surface, a DEM surface, a digital elevation model, the point, as soon as your points exceed 1 million, it'll create that external file that needs to follow that Civil 3D drawing in order to have your surface. If you're just doing standard ground shots, it's 2 million. So once you know that, now we start talking about documentation. So you want to document your workflow so that all team members know what to do, where to get the latest version of files, and where we start talking about do's and don'ts. Things that we want to do. Do you ever want to work directly in a consultant's drawing that you're using as an XREF? The answer is no, you don't ever want to directly work in it, but you do want to clean that drawing to make sure that you don't introduce anything into your drawings when you XREF it in. And if you'll hang on a second, I actually have a link for that, Lori, so bear with me. I'll come right back to this. Come back here. Right, and those of you that don't know to go clean a drawing, this is also a good thing. When you start having problems, this is one of the first things I like to do, is clean the drawing and see what comes up. And I'm going to paste that into the chat. So, whoops, organize it. I put that in the wrong one. Let's go here. So right here, it's a blog I wrote on best practices to clean drawings that come from outside your organization. Anytime you receive a drawing that comes from outside your organization, I can tell you right now, assume that drawing is dirty. Do not assume that that drawing is clean and ready for use in your environment. So I highly recommend that you always go through and clean those drawings so that you minimize the amount of contaminated data that may get introduced to yours. Yes, Land XML is a great tool for cleaning issues with feature lines and pipe networks. It can be, yes, depends on the level of corruption or the level of problems that you've got. Does AutoCAD 26 change the DWG database format? Is it still the 2018? To my knowledge right now, it's still the 2018 format. That has not changed. So and some of the other do's and don'ts. If you are creating complex surfaces, are you going to be data referencing them into other pieces? If you create a surface from an XML, you can't delete the XML file because the surface will no longer rebuild. If you're using data shortcuts, again, this comes back to the first one. Make sure your file directory structure supports the data shortcut well. If it's too deep in a file structure or your file paths end up being too long, you're going to run into a lot of problems with that. One of the other things I have run across a number of times is be very careful if you are migrating up to ACC. What I typically tell people, or what I recommend, is if you're going to go to ACC, start your new projects in there, only migrate the projects you absolutely have to move to ACC, because ACC data shortcuts with BIM Collaborate Pro, I have seen some issues where you will open up a drawing and it will tell you that the surface needs to be renamed. You rename it and save it. Next time you open the drawing, it tells you it needs to be renamed back. That's a problem that I have come across, and it requires a little bit of effort for us to go through and clean that up, but just beware. So those are the things that I typically like to do. And again, do's and don'ts. If certain things to avoid, like if you guys are running in a SharePoint or a Microsoft OneDrive environment, don't put your drawings in there. That's going to create problems. Maybe not now, but it will create problems later on down the road. So just be aware that those are not actually supported by Autodesk. They're considered third party because all of Autodesk products run and do file locking and handle the save process and everything like that using Microsoft SMB protocols. OneDrive and SharePoint do not use those, so it's not considered supported, even though they do it. Very good question. Migrate catalogs or reuse from year to year. So if you're talking about your part catalogs, generally speaking, you can reuse those year after year unless there is a significant change to pressure networks or a significant change to the gravity networks. And those things you will find out when you get the new version installed and you start kicking the tires on it. First thing I do is I usually go back and look at the pipe catalogs and see, have the drawings been modified? Have anything been modified since 2012? Because most of them are 2012. If nothing has changed, then I don't need to migrate. If something has changed, then I will set it up to see, do my current catalogs work with the current information, and work from there. So those are a lot of the bits and pieces of ensuring consistency. Is make sure you have, and document your workflow. I'm not saying that you need to document everything down to the nth degree, but you do need to document this set of drawings is going to contain this amount of this information. They are going to be data referenced into these drawings, things like that. So you want to have an overview, as I call it. You want to have like a 10,000 foot overview of how you get from the initial schematic design or the initial contract signing all the way to the final as-built deliverables. And you're going to need to have that process, and you're going to need to come back and look at that process when things don't go right and see where did things go wrong, which then leads me into why feedback is important. So feedback is critical to ensure the workflows are being followed. And this is something I tell people all the time. Encourage your users. Remember, if you're a CAD manager or you're managing the CAD assets or you're trying to push all these things out, encourage your users to provide feedback on everything that you've done. They are using your hard work, so be willing to listen to them. Standards are a living entity. They are not static, so you must be prepared for change. And I can't stress this enough. Your standards are a framework, but you have to have flexibility in your standards when things change or something new comes up or something like that. Encourage ideas. Right? Someone may have a better idea or a method of doing something. Your people, the people you hire, the people that you work with, things like that, somebody may have a better idea. And listen, always listen to them. They may have a better way of doing something. They might have a better process that can add more efficiency, can trim time off of something, things like that. And outside the box thinking can sometimes simplify a process. If you absolutely believe that your process is the right process to follow, and somebody comes back with something completely outside the box, be willing to at least try it and see if it works. If it works and it's more efficient than what you're currently doing, then great. See about how you implement it. If it gets you the same result and it's about the same, then offer that up to the users as an option so that they have two different methods of doing something, right? We've been in all AutoCAD for years. We all know AutoCAD has a million ways to do something, or as I typically say, there's at least 4 ways to draw a line before we get into custom programming. Pick which one works best for you, right? More eyes on what your end product, your templates, your setup, things like that means more opportunities to uncover a problem before it happens. If somebody goes, I don't think this is going to work, and they can show you why, you might be able to head that off at the pass, make whatever change needs to be made before it's now fully integrated and everybody's doing it, and now we've created a much bigger monster. And the thing I always tell people, be prepared to not like somebody's feedback, but always listen with an open mind, right? If you're willing to listen with an open mind, somebody may give you something that while you may not agree with it, it might give you a thought process that maybe we could do it differently and make it better. And it's not the current way, and it's not the way that was presented, but you might find a happy ground somewhere. I have always been a big fan of listening to feedback. I don't like feedback sometimes, but it's a great method to see what's going on and to see how things are going, right? If you don't have an open forum, or if you don't have an email address, or you don't have a collection area where you're gathering ideas, problems, things like that, I highly encourage you to have it, even if it's anonymous. Like, you can set up a Google Docs form. There's a number of ways to do this where somebody could say, this doesn't make sense to me, without being singled out or without feeling stupid. If you can come up with that method, you'll get a lot more feedback so that somebody isn't being singled out, or somebody doesn't feel like something is stupid. So let's see, how often do you create a new template instead of reusing from year to year? I will always create a new template if the DWG format changes. If I am, and I will be honest with you, when I see a major change, like when Civil 3D 21 went to pipe runs for pressure pipes, I then rebuilt the template, because now I have to build new catalogs instead of having separate catalogs for each one. So those are the kinds of times that I will go through and rebuild one, is if the DWG format changes, or a function that I'm used to in Civil 3D changes how it's being done. What's the best method for sharing Civil 3D company standard support files, a server drive letter, SharePoint, OneDrive, or other? That's going to be more about, that's a very good question, by the way. So thank you, Dane. Now, this is where we start getting into other things that go on. Are your people 100% in the office? Are your people 100% remote? Do you have a hybrid environment? So if everyone's in the office, then a standard server makes sense for your standards, or something like that. You could use SharePoint, you could use OneDrive. Again, it's just about mapping. So the things that get you into trouble is if you're connecting over VPN and everything's on your company server, everything is going to be slower when you're trying to access things off the server. That's the nature of the beast. Same, those of you that have ever worked on VPN for large projects and have data references, you know that there is some slow behaviors. So things like that. I'm a big fan of creating all the standards on a network folder and then pushing that down to the local machine. So no matter where that user is, if they're on VPN, if they're off VPN, if they're fully remote, if they're in the office, everything is coming from their local machine. So the only thing that they're accessing on the servers is the actual drawings they're working in, but everything else is on the local machine. It really simplifies things. And if someone has a problem, it's easier to figure out, all right, did something go missing? Did something corrupt in that folder? Something like that. We can reset settings. Let's see, how about using ACC for standard sharing? Jason, that's going to be a slightly different question because that is now new for 26. You can actually set up your profiles to grab standards from ACC. I will be doing the AutoCAD webinar on that April. I highly recommend that we get you in that so you can kind of see how that's going to be done. All right, Autodesk, let's see, can we get more information on reference templates and good practices? ACC, that is Autodesk Construction Cloud. So that's the Autodesk Construction Cloud. Project-wise, sheet sets, project-wise is an animal unto itself, but you can have project-wise push down standards to the local machine and push for, and look at them from there. But it does require some setup. Wow, we're getting a lot of good questions, so hang on just a second. We'll come back to some of these. So just to give you an idea, we do have some Civil 3D training courses we do offer. So we can go to imagineit.com, training, find a class and enroll, find a course. Here is where you can change your software up here to Civil 3D, and you can see all about Civil 3D specific classes. I am going to come back to the rest of the questions. I just want to finish this portion first. So now we're moving into the live Q&A. So let's go back and see, what did I miss? Let's see, where can we get more information on creating batch files to update local template files? That's actually, it's not even so much where we get more information on that. That's actually a fairly easy one. And I've done this before. It's Robocopy. Robocopy, and then you have your source and destination, right? Source, destination, and then you put the /mir command. That's pretty much it. That's the script. What it's going to do is it's going to do a robocopy. It's going to look at the source destination, which is typically on your server. It's going to look at your the destination it's going, which will be on the C drive, and then you're going to do a /mir. This is a mirror command. So what it will do is it's only going to copy things that have changed from the source versus the destination. That's how we do that one. That one's fairly straightforward. Let's see. Autodesk offered cloud storage for each license. Is that pooled? So ACC is not pooled, but you have one ACC site. If you're talking about Autodesk Drive, that is not pooled. Everyone gets a certain amount of space for Autodesk Drive. Reference templates and good practices. We have a lot of information on reference templates. We can talk more about that. I might be able to find some things on that. Adam, you're looking for the day that you have all your users on ACC and all my standards will be in a resource project. Yep, that's coming. Any experience with Ignite? We've been using it for a few years and haven't experienced issues or slowdown. Connor, that's a very good thing. Now with Ignite, I have quite a bit of experience working with Ignite, and I'll tell you, it's fairly good. There is one exception to that, and that's survey databases. If you're working with survey databases, you cannot work with them off an Ignite drive. You have to create them locally and copy them up. And the reason for that is there is a transitional file that gets created, what is it, a SQLXX file or whatever. That's a transaction file as you're creating things in the survey database. Once that goes live, Ignite is constantly trying to update and is locked out, and it fails, and then it will crash CAD. So that is the only negative with Ignite that I have found. Yep, and Brian, I know you're using ACC to do this in 25 right now. 26 actually now lets you set it up inside your Autodesk environment. Much easier. Let's see, if I'm version 23, would you upgrade to 25 or wait for 26? That's a very good question, Jason. The question I would refer you back, or the next question I would ask you is, how far on the bleeding edge do you want to be? Civil 3D 25 is now up to a .2.1 update, and the AutoCAD engine underneath is at 1.5 or 1.4, which means there's been quite a few updates. Are you willing to take a chance on going to 26, knowing that there may be issues that need to be resolved in updates? And are you willing to accept that risk, or are you willing to go with a product that seems to be a little more stable? How can we link a parts library to everyone's Civil 3D since it's stored locally? Can that be changed to look at network folders? Absolutely, it can. So what you're talking about, Brett Warwick, what you're talking about is that you have to go in and set the pressure network catalog and the pipe network catalogs to your network location, and everyone can pull from those. And you can actually set that up in a profile in ARG. And when working with pipe networks and creating a data shortcut, we found if we swap a part, sometimes it doesn't reflect in other drawings even after syncing. We found that XREFing the pipework file seems to work better. There are some issues with this process. That is absolutely correct. So what you are changing, when you swap a style, when you swap a part and the style doesn't change, it may or may not update in your drawing, even if you do a full resync of the data reference. So, and that's been a long-standing issue. We've known about it for years. Autodesk has not come up with a good fix for it, but yes, we have done that. Preferred configuration of your sheet set drawings data to produce your full project deliverable plan set. Can you talk about preferred configuration? Yep. So preferred configuration of your sheet sets, drawings, XREFs, data shortcuts. Ooh, that's a big one. So trying to think of how I would even tackle that. So I know how I have my standards set up for things like that. Let me see here. I can get this out of the way. There it is. So hang on just a second. Let me change some information here. Right, so if I'm in a directory like this is how I like to have things set up from a standards perspective, right? So I have AutoCAD 22 and I have a profile in here. This includes my ARG. This includes everything that I would need. And I have a template. So these would be the base templates that I would use for 22 because I wanted to rebuild their templates for 24. And so I have a 22 and 24, 22 and 24, and then I have a common. So in the common, this is where everything never changes. So when I'm setting this up, I have a common folder. These are the things that don't change between versions or generally do not change between versions. So this is where I have all of my SHXs, anything that I use for fonts. I have a line type file folder here. This is where I keep my line type shapes separated from my font shapes. I have my interface. So this is where I keep my custom CUI. I have my plotters, and in the plotters, the only thing I have in here is 2 PC3s, and then I have all the plot styles. And I have this set up so that it is referencing the user's plot styles as well as this, or for PC3 files. I have my settings. So these are all of our common settings that, again, get set through the ACAD doc.lsp. So every time they open up a drawing, this is what it's doing. I have our survey stuff here. So this is the survey database information. Everything is set here. We have pipes. So this is our pipes catalog. So this is where all of those things are going. All right, so let's come back up here to common. I have templates. Now these are the templates that they're using for XREF in their sheet sets. And we kept those in here as opposed to being version specific. And then I have all of their tool palettes here. This is how I like to set things up. I like things to be set up very cleanly so that if there's a problem, it's very easy to figure out which directory the problem is. Now, data references, things like that. If I'm in a project, I like to keep my data reference folder as close to the root of the project as I can. I have seen instances where people create all of their projects based off of a year in a drive letter. I prefer to segregate my projects for data shortcuts into the project folder itself and not linked to just a single drive. Let's see, that's more or less my preferred configuration. XREFs, I like XREFs generally to be relative path. That way, if I make a copy of a folder and I drop it somewhere else, it's all relative path. So I don't need to go through and fix everything. I also like to set the XREF layer. There's a global command for XREF layer where you can put your XREFs all on a specific layer. And I set that in the template. Yeah, that's more or less my preferred configuration. And then for like the project itself, I will have, again, I like to keep things simple. So I have my project folders. Like when I did Civil 3D many years ago, we had our project folder. So it would be the project year dash client name dash project number. So if we did multiple projects for the same client, there'd be a 001, 002, 003, and we would have a list that would tell us what those are. In each one of those project folders, we'd have our SD for schematic design, our DD for design development, our CD for construction documents, so we'd have AB for as-built, and we'd have CA for construction administration. And anything that lived in DD would stay in DD unless it needed to be copied out for the next phase, etc. And then all of the data would still be linked back to the data shortcut folder that would be in the root of those. So we could copy drawings from one phase to the next phase to the next phase. Now that may not work for you. And again, this is why we need to find out what folder structure works for you. This worked very well for us because it allowed me to grab people from a remote office. I had an office, I was dealing with an office that was in Phoenix, and they could help the office in Sacramento, or they could help the office in Las Vegas or Portland or any of the other offices, because all of the folder structure was the same. Our file naming was the same. So it was just a matter of understanding what needed to be done in the project and run. So we didn't have to retrain them on, oh yeah, well, this office does the file structure this way, this office does file structure this way. What's your advice for some companies who waste their productive time working on matters that can be easily taken care of by standards and templates? Oh, that's where here's how you tackle that. The first thing you need to do is, if there is no CAD manager, you have to approach senior management and you have to be able to show numbers, right? It's always a return on investment. If you can show that a project that had developed standards and templates was delivered faster than a project without them, without a lot of the rework, things like that, that makes a big impact in order to get those things put in place. And it's always about return on investment. One of the projects I worked on, we didn't really have good controls in place, and we didn't have a lot of those things. And I think the project was a 5-year project, and we spent over 1 million man hours doing it. Now, a project of a similar scope that we started with everything in place and a template file and things like that, we cut that down to about 750,000 man hours for a similar 5-year project. 250,000 man hours at whatever they're charging is very telling. You might not be able to pull those kind of numbers, but those are the things you have to look at.